by Enterprise Strategy Group, or ESG Lab. And what we concluded is that you can more than double the acceleration of your transactional I/Os when using SSDs in a hybrid storage configuration. And joining us to talk about this today is special guest Matt Glaves, who is a senior solution architect at Drobo, and we're reversing the roles a little bit. I'm the one who's not in the office, and Matt is talking live in our studio at Drobo in San Jose, California. How are you doing today, Matt?
Doing great. Hey, everyone.
Fantastic. Well, we go here to the abstract. If you join today's session, you probably know that Drobo arrays are designed to be big enough to handle multiple applications from an IT environment. We got a lot of enterprise-like features that don't take up too much of your budget, but is it really ready to do all of the things that you need it to in your environment? And so the reason behind us commissioning a study with Enterprise Strategy Group Labs, ESG Lab, and Matt, to tell us a little bit about yourself, you were not just a regular applicant to Drobo. You used to use Drobo in a previous life, right?
That's correct. I was a previous Drobo customer, and that's what I was very happy with the product, and that's what brought me here to Drobo.
All right, 15 years of doing IT stuff. And as a reward for you having joined this year, we put you on a project with ESG Lab. Vinny Chewinski over there. Pretty fun, huh?
Yes, it was a very in-depth project, but in the end, I think the results turned out very well.
Great. So let's go ahead and look at some of those results. We had a configuration that's pretty much aligned with how a lot of small business architectures might look. It wasn't just one box running a bunch of test script files like you'll see in a lot of benchmarking. The goal, Matt, was to put together something that looked a lot like a small business environment might, with all the typical applications and architecture. Tell us a little bit about how the configuration was put together to validate it.
Sure. So what we set up was something very similar to what a typical Drobo customer comes to us to ask for, something like a VMware Essentials pack. We had 3 or 4 hypervisors and then some virtual machines on there to simulate a good mixed load small business environment. So with that, we not only had some file servers, some email servers, but we also had the B1200i. We used 2, so we could go in and make the determination of the speed differences between the physical tiering with the SSDs and without. And that also gave us the ability to do the high availability with the shared SAN storage there.
Well, the customer could probably do it with just one B1200i. One of the cool differentiated capabilities it has is a combination of both capacity and performance in the same system. So you can have volumes that would automatically be tiered and put onto the 7200 RPM SAS drives. Maybe you can double-click down a little bit and talk about what's in that performance B1200i, because the one for the feature validation, that was just straight 7200 RPM SAS drives, right? What did the performance config look like?
Sure. So the performance configuration was 9 nearline SAS drives. Each were 2 terabytes. And then we had 3 SSDs. These are an enterprise-grade SSD. And what that Drobo is going to do, it's one of our largest features this year that we rolled out for the B1200, which is automated data-aware tiering. Really what that means is that particular Drobo is going to look at your data in flight, make a decision as to how transactional the data is, and then either put it onto the SSD tier for higher performance or onto the spinning disks for more bulk or archival data. And then what the Drobo is going to do is it's going to periodically check what we call a heat index for that data, and if it becomes more or less transactional, move them between the tiers. So what that gives us is a vast amount of storage using the nearline SAS disks, and then the SSDs for performance. So we get a much higher performance out of the unit while still keeping a very large amount of storage.
And you can see the difference pretty clearly when you go to the results. Before we get there, though, the configuration itself, I think the folks at ESG, Vinny and others, are used to large storage systems and taking quite a while to set the lab up. How long do you think it took you to set this entire lab up? They were pretty impressed.
Oh, sure. It's as with every Drobo, it's a very simple setup process using our dashboard in combination with VMware. I'd say in order to set up all the storage and everything required with building the virtual machines was no more than about 2 hours.
And that's the beauty of a virtualized environment. You have the flexibility to spawn a lot of those things up, and it's how we were able to do a large amount of testing in this sort of configuration. Heck, that's what small businesses want to do. They want to get to kind of an essential core building block or pod with their configuration. That's what we did here, folks. Now let's look at some of the impact of SSDs. If the chart doesn't tell it to you, 2.3x the benefit of SSDs in a database config. For a file server, 2.4x. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how these tests were run, Matt, and what they were intended to simulate. Because with the randomness of the real-world traffic, that's how, based on how often it sees those small reads and writes, that's how we derive the benefit. Talk a little bit about what the workloads look like and how tiering made an impact.
Sure. So in this situation, both of these were really there in order to test our IOPS performance, how many inputs and outputs a second can be handled by the unit. But it's a real-world IOPS. It's not a situation where this is only for testing. This is meant to simulate a real file server and a real database server. And so what we would do is go ahead and spin up each one of these tests. You'll see in the orange, that's our SAS-only configuration. So with that, we still got some very good performance from the nearline SAS drives. But what you'll find is with the SSDs enabled, it took our performance, at least 2 times over the nearline SAS configuration. And it's important to note that's a completely hands-off. From the time you put in the SSDs, it's going to automate that whole process. So there was no situation where I had to say, well, now we're going to put the database or the file server onto the SSDs. The Drobo actually does that dynamically. So it's literally, we popped in the SSDs and we went from the orange to the green. So it's a vast improvement with a very simple upgrade.
Let's talk about the workload specifically. So the database workload, if someone were to try to recreate this themselves, OLTP, online transaction processing, is typically smaller chunks, which is why IOs per second is the limiting factor. A lot of people think of storage performance as being purely bandwidth. How fast is your pipe and how much data can you pump? Almost always, in your experience too, Matt, in IT, the limiting factor for storage isn't the throughput, but rather the fact that you can only handle so many IOs per second. And transactional things like a database or a file server who's doing small files, that can really put a tax on your system. So maybe you can describe a little bit what those workloads look like.
Oh, sure. So with that, as we were saying, it's more transactional data, and that's exactly it. So with the database, with the file server, what we're looking at is fairly small files. So with the database, that we're going to be as small as a 4K block that we're going to use there. So a very small amount of data, and with that, because they're very small, you're not typically limited by the throughput of the SAM, but as you said, with the IOPS. So it's very small transactions, as fast as it can go, and so with that, it's going to be a bit of a mix of file sizes or block sizes, but in this one's going to be typically a very small block size. And it's important when looking at a SAN, a lot of times people will say, well, I'm looking to see what the maximum bandwidth of it is. Well, what you'll see here is that with the IOPS that high, it's not something where you're going to hit your head on your maximum throughput. It's actually going to be the IOPS, and that's very important in both of these tests.
Hey, last thing on this slide, Matt, around the max. We're showing a real-world number north of 1,500 for both database and file server, a mix of different sizes of IOs as well as a mix of reads and writes, mix of random, mix of sequential. In the best-case scenario, what can someone expect from a Drobo B1200i? Let's say a 4K sequential read type test, the one that would test the max I/O throughput. 1,500 is a great number, certainly way bigger than you can get with hard drives alone. What could you get as a theoretical max in a benchmarking situation?
Oh, sure. As a theoretical max with a Drobo, a peak IOPS, you're going to see well over 2,000 IOPS. You may see as high as 2,500. Right.
Not necessarily indicative of these kind of balance tests, which are hammering it full bore with these type of workloads. But let's talk about hammering it, because the next scenario that we're going to see after we talk about what the results mean here will be the combination of multiple workloads together. In a hard drive only configuration, you can get I/O performance that would require from a small virtual server environment. When you're talking to customers, Matt, 500 to 600, the kind you get with just hard drives, that can, in a lot of cases, support a pair of clustered virtual hosts running a handful of VMs. Is that your experience? You don't necessarily need the SSDs for an entry config.
Yeah, working with small business customers that have maybe 2 hypervisors and a mix of 5 to 10 virtual machines, it's very common to find that their mixed load IOP requirements are only about 300 IOPS, and that can be for a fairly good sized small business of maybe 150 or 200 users. So with that, when selecting a Drobo and trying to decide between the physical tiering with the SSDs, the vast majority of our customers, as they are getting into virtualization, can quite happily live on the nearline SAS alone. And then the great part, which we'll talk about, is they have a great upgrade path there. So they can start with the nearline SAS, and then as their virtualization requirements grow, maybe they turn up some more virtual machines, or they have some growth within the organization. It's a hands-free upgrade.
And we talked about the improvements that can be made 2.3 to 2.4x over those type of operations. Maybe we should have covered this earlier, Matt. The whole acronym, IOPS, Input Output Operation Per Second. It's got some division in there, the per second sort of thing. It's a common performance measurement used in benchmarking. Maybe you can describe why the results here are so impressive, because when people are doing their capacity planning, they need to think of, hey, maybe 75 to 100 IOPS max, really more toward the low end, 75 IOPS per drive. If you've got a small number of drives, there's no way you can get up to that 1,500, 2,000 IOPS, which is why the SSDs are pretty impressive. Talk about, just at a basic level, how people approach thinking about IOPS, combining hard drives with SSDs.
What I normally do when I talk to a customer is I say, when selecting a SAN, it falls into three categories. The first two are pretty easy, which is the first is physical capacity, and that's the number of disks times the number of slots. It's pretty easy to calculate that. The next is throughput. Again, that's fairly easy to calculate. With the B1200i, it has 3 gigabit ports on there, so it's pretty easy to calculate the bandwidth. The third is the IOPS, and that's the kicker, and that's what we're talking about right now, and this is where the SSDs really shine. So for the IOPS, that is, as we said before, the inputs and outputs a second, that the requirements of your file servers or virtualized servers. And with the Drobo, we're a single shelf unit. And as you said, every drive in there is good for about 75 to 100 IOPS. Well, in that unit, if you put in all of the nearline SAS disks, then you're limited in your number of IOPS. Well, what we could do is we could put in maybe 15K disks, and that might give you a higher IOP rating, but you're going to find that your storage requirements drop. So what we did at Drobo is we did the best combination. So we added in SSDs. SSDs have a very high IOP rating, well in excess of the nearline SAS drives. And by using those in combination with the automated tiering, what we were able to do is, in a single affordable small business focused shelf, we were able to get a much higher IOP rating than we could ever get with the individual disks, while still keeping the amount of storage at a very usable level. For us, it's for the typical small business user, that's plenty of storage for not only their VMs, but then also for the backups as well. So you're not looking at trying to find another place for your backups. You could also store those on the Drobo.
As I like to say, who doesn't want both performance and capacity? Folks love that. And speaking of both, you might actually want to run 2, 3, 4 different types of applications, because you're talking about that single shelf solution, Matt. Folks are going to put their primary tier 2 applications, disk-based backup, all that sort of stuff all together. So as you stack up workloads, another thing that the ESG validation did was confirm that in the average size small business, and we used mailboxes of 500 mailboxes. That's not quite small. It's a pretty decent size. You can stack email and database, and email, database, and file server, and still be well within the limits of what the system can do. So it gives you that room to grow when you do have stacking of all these workloads together. Talk about why that's important, because for a lot of folks, the email server can completely saturate your entire SAN just by itself.
Sure. Yeah, so this test here was actually probably the most useful for our average customer. This is showing that the Drobo not only can excel at individual tests, but when combined, the Drobo still has the performance in order to support all of these various applications. A typical use case for Drobo, you're going to have some virtualized servers, you're going to have a domain controller, a file server, an Exchange server, and maybe a SQL server backing things up. It's going to be a mixed environment. And in this test, what it showed was that the Drobo not only was able to handle the load, but with the SSDs, it was able to handle the load with really no problem. So in this situation, a very important one, as Mario stated, was the email. The email is simulating a 500-user Exchange deployment. So again, for a small business, that's not a small deployment. with Exchange, that can be a very high IOP load on a SAN. So what we're showing here is not only can we handle the 500 user Exchange deployment, but on top of that, we'll also handle your other small business requirements. So, be it a database, maybe backing your SharePoint, and then a file server for your users. So with this, even on the chart, you can see we're well below the limits of 20 milliseconds. That's pretty much a hard set limit for Exchange, and that's showing us that, hey, there's still room there to put more on the Drobo. So with the SSDs, we could go ahead and throw a domain controller, maybe some other servers on there as well, and still have some headroom.
And as we said before, Matt, it's possible to put the Drobo B1200i with just the hard drives into an environment. You may just not be able to stack all of the workloads onto one another in that case. With classic SMB storage, the stuff that's not enabled by SSDs, you can put a lot of 15K drives in there and put multiple shelves. You can add multiple shelves to add more IOPS. The idea here, though, is that you can do the best of both in just one shelf, and that's what we aim to have validated here. So I think ESG did a great job of designing this particular test to confirm not just that the SAS configuration can support the file server and the email together, but that when you add the SSDs, you can throw the database on there as well and have plenty of room to grow. So, with that, how would you characterize max email? Because we say it in the report, we can go in excess of 500. If someone just wanted to use it as an email box, what would their limits look like?
Well, with that, if they just wanted to use a B1200, maybe with the SSDs just for email, internally we've tested that at over 1,000 users. That may not be real world. There's some things in there to consider when deploying an email server, such as mailbox quotas and other things. But you may find that as long as you have some realistic limits put in place, that 1,000 users on a B1200i is realistic. That would
or
be
even 1,200. I think the jet stress max, before we get to that 20 millisecond number, that you can get up to even 1,200 mailboxes, which is a great thing. I think that's a good illustration that it's not that you can't use the Drobo B1200i in the way you would have used other classic storage. You could get 1,200 mailboxes on a system that has 18 terabytes of raw storage, which is pretty cool for an email server. But the case that we wanted to make sure we validated, I think it's the more important one, is what if I have email and I have all this other stuff? Can I get away with just buying one box? Because oftentimes when you're talking to customers, Matt, the reason they're calling you is they want to see if they can do it in one box because they don't have the budget to buy dedicated storage for all their different applications. So overall, you were fairly impressed with our ability to deliver all those things simultaneously, right?
Sure. I mean, with a Drobo, just even from the nearline SAS, over the course of the rollout of this product, we've made improvements all over in terms of features and performance. And at this point, even with the nearline SAS only and with the SSDs, we offer a very high level of performance in a single shelf system. So even with just the nearline SAS, you could still do a fairly large Exchange deployment, and then again have that upgrade path that if you outgrew it, pop in some SSDs, and then you're off into the 1,200 range.
Fantastic. Hey, let's talk about the impact of SSDs on throughput. We have focused mostly on IOPS here. Throughput's still important, and especially when you're stacking things together, you want to be able to do both streaming and IOPS. In this case, there was a benefit of the SSDs. Not really intuitive here. You wouldn't expect necessarily with the SSDs for there to be a big benefit on tiering, but there was about a 5% increase. It looks pretty big here because the scale of the chart shows that there, but in terms of draw comparison between the numbers, there's about a 5% increase on the SSDs. Where did that come from, Matt? Why is it that SSDs would even help the throughput?
Well, with the SSDs, what we do internally is we store some of the file indexing and some of our internal indexing on the SSDs, and that actually helps boost our streaming performance as well. So in this situation, everyone's backup windows are forever shrinking. So this is an option where if we have a user that maybe is coming up on the limits of their backup window, if they needed to try to shrink that a little bit, they could use the SSDs and actually get a boost in the streaming performance over a 6 or 8 hour backup window. That can make a very large difference.
And this, again, is real-world testing done with this particular workload here, Matt. 512 meg files. that were being used here to drive the throughput. 285, is that a max limit that the B1200i can handle, or can you expect to see greater than 300 megabytes a second across all three ports? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, this real-world test compared to some of the other synthetic benchmarking you've done on throughput.
Sure. So with the SSDs, at 285 megabits a second, if you look at the B1200i, it has 3 gigabit Ethernet ports on the back. So line rate is going to be about 3 gig per second, or theoretical line rate. But when you factor in all of the overhead of TCP/IP and maybe even some additional traffic on the network, what you're seeing right there at 285 is really the maximum I think you could really ever see out of a 3 gigabit ports configured in this situation. Is configured with multipathing, MPIO, to better load balance across there, and that's really about the best I think you could see. That's not necessarily a Drobo limit. That's more of an Ethernet limit there, and unless we added another port, you couldn't see any better speed out of it there.
So I think for capacity planning perspective, folks who have workloads that are large file sizes, they can expect to get line rate speed if their sender is sending it at line rate speed. The Drobo's there to catch it at line rate speed across multiple ports.
Correct. So,
Great.
Again, think backups. As long as you have a sufficient amount of bandwidth on your network and your hosts are configured for the multipathing, yeah, you could see really line rate there on the streaming data.
Well, Matt, one of the questions we get all the time, you and I both help man the online chat at Drobo. Go to any one of our product pages and look in the lower right-hand corner after a couple seconds. You can chat live with Drobo experts that way. They ask about putting in different types of SSDs into the Drobo. And we, with our Drobo B1200i, offer a enterprise-grade, server-grade SSD, and you can buy that from Drobo. A lot of folks, they may have some 2.5-inch enterprise SSDs. We have a knowledge base article on our site that talks about the specific ones that we've tested. You don't want to put a laptop drive into a storage enclosure like a Drobo, but 2.5 inches is the more common size. Talk about this IC dock adapter and how people can leverage investments they've made in enterprise 2.5-inch drives in a Drobo, because we have a carrierless design. You can't just pop a 2.5-inch drive in.
Sure. So that you touched upon the most important aspect of this, and that is when looking at SSDs, every single one of our product pages has a link on there that says what drives work with this particular Drobo. So with the B1200i, it's very important to remember these are 2.5-inch enterprise grade hard disks, not consumer grade, not desktop grade. But beyond that, yeah, with the Drobo, one of the great things about it, we are a carrierless design, so all you're going to do is put in a bare 3.5-inch disk. On the SSDs, we sell a 3.5-inch SSD you could get from us, but if you wanted to supply your own, then you could use a 2.5, but then you're just going to need an adapter. And so we have these IC docks, which is what we've used and tested internally, and that's a convenient way to take maybe some 2.5-inch enterprise SSDs you already have available, put them in the adapter, and then it'll fit directly into the Drobo.
Great. Let's talk about sizing guidelines. We gave it, from a performance perspective, different numbers of users and stuff, but I think for a lot of folks, the B1200i launched late last year in Q4 of 2011. Now that we have support for tiering SSDs, does it fundamentally change the general sizing, or is it just make the service levels for that size customer even better? How do you normally characterize that with customers? Because the B1200i is still not intended to replace an EMC SAN in a multi-thousand-person company, but it might be a great place to migrate your Tier 2 applications if you are running out of space on that big EMC SAN.
Sure. So I guess the answer there is both. So for our core SMB customers that are calling in and looking at a B1200i, we now have not only much more flexibility in terms of IOPS, but we also have a great upgrade path. You can start a little small and then add in the SSDs, or as you look at the lifespan of your project, we can now go ahead and say, okay, well, we'll fit today and we'll fit in the future. So start with the SSDs now or add them later, and now we have a much wider range of SMB customer that we can support there on a B1200i. The other, which I think has been another great benefit of the SSDs and some of the new features that we've added to the B1200i, is that Tier 2, Tier 3 storage. A very popular use case of a Drobo is use with something like Veeam. Maybe we're a backup target. That's a great use where you don't want to add additional very expensive disks or shelves to your Tier 1 storage. Look at a Drobo, roll that out, and use that as your Tier 2 storage for your backup, so something like Veeam. Another very popular use case, setting up lab environments. Let's say that you have a Tier 1 storage and you want to set up an HA environment for developers or for IT for testing. A Drobo can be a great choice for that. Not only is it simple to set up, but things like we're recently got our VMware 5 certification, where Hyper-V, SQL clustering, all that's supported on the B1200i. So it can be a very compelling use case, really across the board from the SMB even into the enterprise. There's a Drobo that fits just about everywhere.
Super. So as we put it together here, Matt, the B1200i, it's iSCSI SAN storage, great. Even in a base configuration for things like disk-based backup or Tier 2 applications, or in a smaller environment, it can fit if your I/O sizing requirements are such that you can fit with just hard drives only. Like a lot of storage devices, if you add up the I/Os for each of the hard drives, you can get a fair number of I/Os there. And you have a video on our website. I didn't include a link here, but if you want to get instructions from Matt on how you can characterize the I/O needs of your environment in about 5 minutes, Matt takes you through all the steps of doing it, not just in Windows, but in VMware, as well as for Linux. So that's cool. The all-in-one type storage for a small business, great if you want to add the SSDs to give you that boost right away. Certainly in virtualization solutions, you need that failover live migration, and that's one of the reasons why you do need a SAN. If you're going from a small VMware deployment that's just using local storage to wanting to get that high availability, and that's one of the biggest reasons Drobo developed the B1200i, was specifically to give you a more highly available architecture with dual power supplies, a modular design, and the ability to increase the performance as you scale out that solution, folks wanting to get that thing all together. So thanks, Matt, for taking us through those details. In terms of some of the questions and key takeaways before we wrap up, how many total VMs can you put on a B1200i? I mean, a lot of folks really, they see how affordable it is, they see how easy it is to use, and now they see some cool performance numbers. What's your normal advice there for how many you can put? I suppose the answer is it depends what the VMs are doing.
Sure, and that's the hard answer. So is it realistic to put 100 VMs on a B1200i? No, probably not. Is it realistic to put 25? Yeah, that's a very realistic number of VMs to put on a B1200i. That number could go up a little bit or go down a little bit based on those IOPS requirements. So normally, if you're looking at a B1200i and maybe you have a deployment in place, maybe we like to get some IOPS numbers, collect your IOPS numbers and look and see where you fall. As you said, using that URL where we explain how to do it, and that'll help you better size the unit and understand, that it's going to grow with you in your deployment. So that's a biggie. So 25 VMs, yeah, probably. That's a good mix, as long as it was a mix of VMs. But again, it's highly variable.
Super. In terms of VDI, that's virtualization, and there's a lot of folks right now who are interested, but they see that the storage requirements for VDI can be really, really intense. So it creates a really expensive solution. What's the stance on VDI as it would apply to the B1200i, Matt?
VDI is something that, if you talk to VMware and some other vendors, it's a very hot topic right now. And the part that they never include is what those IOPS requirements are. So VDI, you're talking 100 or more IOPS per user, per VDI instance. So Drobo, when it comes to VDI, for us, we're not a good choice for VDI. VDI storage is going to be very high-end, very high IOP requirements, well in excess of a B1200i. So for Drobo, if you're looking at VDI, not the greatest fit. We're more for your regular virtualization, and you're going to look at a much higher-end storage, $100,000 storage for your VDI deployment, which a lot of our users find and then realize that maybe VDI isn't for them.
Super. And we covered it a little bit earlier in terms of SSDs. You can really use any SSDs in a B1200i, but we're not going to recommend that you use desktop-grade SSDs, and there are some restrictions, a little bit more than you'd find with hard drives in a Drobo. So we'd ask that you consult the Drobo knowledge base. You go to the Drobo knowledge base under support.drobo.com, type in SSD, and that first article that comes up will give you information on how to choose the right SSD for your environment. We have another question that came in online. Do you support multiple GigE connections that can load balance across the GigE? And that's something we talked about a little bit, Matt. MPIO, or multipathing, that was a part of this entire configuration to make sure that we were able to drive those sustained throughputs and get maximum IOPS. Maybe you can recap for us again how MPIO or multipathing works on Drobo.
Sure. Yeah. So with multipathing, typically in a server environment, you're familiar with bonding NICs or maybe teaming NICs. Well, in an iSCSI world, we're going to use what's called multipathing, as Mario said, or MPIO. This is supported within the operating system. Windows, VMware, they all support it within the iSCSI initiator. And what that allows you to do is make multiple connections to the Drobo. So in our test configuration, the Drobo has 3 gigabit ports on there, and then we had our server had 3 gigabit ports, both onto the iSCSI network. And then we configured multipathing, and multipathing will not only provide load balancing across those links, but it'll also provide high availability. So in the event maybe there was a port that went bad on the switch, the server will continue to use the other 2 ports that are configured. In a typical deployment, our users are not typically looking for the absolute maximum throughput. They just need a good mix of throughput and IOPS. So normally what I recommend is at least two NICs dedicated to the iSCSI traffic on each server.
Great. Hey, and thanks everybody for your questions. Thank you for your participation. These Drobo Broadcast Network sessions are beneficial because we get great participation from folks like you. And Matt, hey, thanks for joining this the first time you're on the Drobo Broadcast Network. Hey, maybe you'll have to bump me out of the presenter seat here one of these days for a session here soon.
Some big shoes to fill. Thank you, Mario.
Yes, big in terms of me unfortunately weighing more than I should. But hey, I fit the perfect demographic for an IT person, unfortunately. With that, I want to thank everybody for your participation. Tune in next time as we talk about more topics of interest to SMB IT. Mario Blandini on behalf of Drobo. This is the Drobo Broadcast Network. See you next time.